That's okay. Well, there we are. Class has started. Okay, well, try and get through the rest of the video today. So I found some other kind of sciencey stuff for later or might be next week, but we'll see how much we get through this week. So we're going to start with the sharing thing. And I should have this all queued up about where we left off last time.
Yeah, that idea of not categorizing, not naming is really interesting too.
Yeah.
What's behind that? Why is it helpful not to name things?
Yeah, I think, and it's a deep philosophical idea, a lot of Buddhist traditions, right? The skepticism of words and labeling. Labels are great for many things, but I think that awe needs mystery, and words kind of circumscribe phenomena. And one of the things that I learned in writing this book, and I think it's true of a lot of places in our culture, is we shy away from mystery. We love things we know and that we're certain about. And awe needs to destabilize your knowledge. It needs to really challenge words and concepts and truisms and the like. And so that's a good mindset.
But what you're saying makes me think a lot about psychedelic experience, which you do deal with in the book, and I'd love to have you read a passage about it. But psychedelic, I really wish I had read this book before I wrote my book on psychedelics, because awe is a very interesting framework in which to understand psychedelic experience. But it's chemically induced awe. Is that cheating?
Oh,
Experience is
they're
experience.
amazing chemicals, like if I do a sauna and I turn it up to 200 and I feel awe, is that cheating? No, one of the really interesting discoveries for me in the aha moment is culture does aha, and there's awe everywhere in all kinds of words. So the awe spa, whatever. So don't do that. But we create a lot of venues and ways to feel awe as a cultural species. We chant. How many of you sing in it together with other people? Or do we have any? It's so awe-inspiring, right? We dance and we create compounds that bring us awe. So it isn't cheating.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, so
it's a legitimate technology of awe.
It is a technology,
right? So there is a wonderful passage in the book.
On that, I can't remember where I saw this or who was doing it, but I think it was probably like a rock musician in a playful moment. But they're talking to tens of thousands of people and get them to all at the same time go. And when you hear 30,000 people all at the same time, making that popping sound, it was just awesome. It's curious how easy it can be if you just get enough cooperation to create awe. All you need is enough people doing the same thing at the same time. And then also that also helps, that doing the same thing, everyone doing the same thing at the same time, that effervescence, the thing he talks about.
Richard, I'm reminded, I have a good friend, and we were out in nature somewhere, and I said, oh, this is amazing. I wonder what it is. And she came back with, who cares? It's so beautiful. And that kind of stuck in my head, that it showed the difference we have. And I sort of appreciated her approach and recognized I'm more analytic type person, but it was nice. It was almost liberating to hear, who cares? It's just beautiful.
That's great. That's great.
But there's so many, but there's a wonderful passage about psychedelic experience. And I think to understand it, we have to know a little bit about your brother.
Yeah. Yeah. I, along in this wild childhood that I had, which I feel very privileged about and wish I'd given more to my daughters, I had all these amazing experiences with my brother Rolf, who was 1 year younger than me. We were born in Mexico. You know, he's a big redheaded guy, grew up in Laurel Canyon, moved to the foothills of the Sierras in a very rural, poor setting, and just had a life of awe as kids, you know, just swam in rivers and wandered and climbed into the mountains and the hills and looked at skies on dirt roads. And I realized that my parents had kind of pointed at him and I in a direction of awe. And we just, everything we did was about this marvelous emotion. And then he got colon cancer. And that is a horror show. It's combat, it's brutal. He had a very tough version of it. I was very close to it and passed away. And his passing, the moment that he left, January 26th, a few days from now, was a moment of awe. Watching people die is mysterious, and it's often awesome because it's so vast and mysterious. We were all gathered around him. I saw his body. I felt the space felt different. I felt him being pulled into some space I couldn't conceptualize. And then what happened is in the aftermath, I was blown off the map and I was aweless. I couldn't find awe or wonder in anything. And I wrote this book. I went in search of awe. And in part of writing the book, and you and I talked a lot about this, I was in grief. I felt them all around me. As a more biologically, evolutionarily oriented scientist, I couldn't make sense of my experiences. I felt his hand on my back twice. He had very big hands. I literally felt the hand on the back. And I was like, okay, that's a sensation. Now I analyze it, still there. I heard his voice. I felt him in places. And I just, thanks to your recommendations, wrote it, right? Like wrote that experience. And so my brother and I, one of the things I love about Michael Polin, as Jason said, is he frees us up to embrace new cultural movements. And one is psychedelics. And I'm not hesitant at all about saying they changed my life when I was 17 years old. They have their perils. And I took them most typically with my brother, Rolf. One of the times was a great, I'm sorry, I'm going on too long.
No.
We were at this, we sneaked in, we sneaked into this gated community's little lake. This is what we used to do, sneak into bodies of water that we could swim in. We usually get arrested. So we sneak into this lake and we're all on psychedelics and there are all these conservative families around. And my brother, who is like as subversive a comedian as existed, got under all this lake seaweed and like pretended he was a sea monster, like, oh, and all the families ran away and we were like, so that is not what I'm going to write about, but, or read. So inspired by Michael and his world-changing work on psychedelics, I want to read, if you don't mind.
Please, yeah.
And this, one of the things that I tried to capture
It's
in
on
the book,
page 211 if you want to read along.
thank you. Awe has a structure to it of dissolving self, feeling connected to vast things, finding your compass in life. And a lot of the experiences, including your own psychedelic writings, have that structure to it. Awe is the structure of transcendent experiences in spirituality, music, nature, etc. And so as I thought about my brother passing and grasped and wanted to represent the role of awe in psychedelics, I wrote this. One experience of psychedelic awe stays in the cells of my body to this day. A trip Rolf and I made in our early 20s in Zihuatanejo, Mexico, where Timothy Leary escaped to win on the run from the law. We went on a journey to El Faro, the lighthouse, a fitting direction for us. my mom taught Virginia Woolf's Transformative to the Lighthouse in her classroom. After taking a small boat to the isthmus on whose faraway point El Faro stood, we walked past dozens of red crabs dug into holes, each throwing out radiating balls of sand to mark its territory, which it defended with absurdly large claws, and we absorbed their strangeness and beauty. A fallen tree in the sand, perhaps a small manzanita, now gnarled driftwood, reached out to us, its smooth branches leaning, yearning, seeking touch, intending, and aware. On the trail, we walked several miles with a precipitous view of the ocean to our left. The Pacific Ocean was illuminated. Magenta bougainvillea pulsated. Arriving at the lighthouse, sweaty and sun-warmed, we stood inside a small circular space with 2 windows peering out. The ocean's horizon vanished into pure, refracting light. The room's white walls glowed in the brilliant sun of Mexico. A roar of wind and waves surrounded us, echoing, hovering, moving, repeating. On the windowsill sat a piece of pink soap and some rusty nails. What decayed for me that day was the interfering neurotic who tries to run the show. That's Aldous Huxley, and
Right.
Michael got me to that. I experienced inexplicable and at times extraordinary sensations. A wind, the embracing powerful sun, the porous boundaries between Rolf and I, entrained rhythms of breathing, side-by-side strides, and the regular crunching of footsteps, and a sublime laughter about life's absurdities, breaking into fragments of sound that vanished in the wind. The distilling of transcendent feelings of brotherhood.
Beautiful. Thank you.
He's a good writer.
And Rolf is, his presence is threaded through the whole book, and he becomes this really important character in the story. And I think that what you say about that and his death gives the lie to the idea that this is just a happiness topic, and that,
Yeah.
you know, awe is not just about tourism and, you know, fun experiences, that awe is something we feel in the face of mystery and death.
Yeah.
So do you think, as I read what you had to say about psychedelics, do you think awe might be part of the mechanism by which psychedelics have their therapeutic effects? I mean, there's been a lot of research suggesting that they're very helpful with addiction and depression and obsession. And how would that work?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I suspect there are a lot of people who are thinking about psychedelics, rightfully so. It's a very important movement in our thinking about the mind and our struggles, which are high today, 30% rise in depression after the pandemic. And there's this interesting debate in the literature about how do we think about the process by which psychedelics benefits us. And I would add music and singing in a choir and dance and all the things that bring us awe. And, you know, one is more of a biological reductionistic account. Oh, it alters serotonin, right? Serotonin has effects on dopamine, which has effects on the vagus nerve, and I can account for the benefits. And I have moved, thanks to our conversations and David Presti and others, away from that, right? That we need the subjective to understand why people change. We are subjective beings where emotions are the drivers of action and shifts in thought. And awe is, I think, going to be, there's a class of transcendent states that I grapple with a bit in the book. Ecstasy and bliss are close to awe, but different. Bliss is where the self just dissolves completely. Awe, you're really aware of your relation to something vast in the world, right? Joy, gratitude, reverence. I love the absurd, right? The feeling of all of life is absurd and comic, which is, you know, closely related to self-transcendence. And awe helps us understand why psychedelics work, which is you transform your sense of self. You have a sense that there are things out in the world, big ideas that you could be part of. It activates this sense of community. So if a veteran is alone in South Dakota and they take psychedelics and it gives them a sense of community, that's awe, and it's structures that we've started to document in the lab. And so I think the self-transcendent state will be the story of psychedelics, as indigenous traditions have been arguing for
Yeah, for a
quite some
long
time.
That's
Yeah.
right. It's also that you know what you talked about earlier, the way that it overturns categories.
Yeah.
And a lot of what seems to be happening in psychedelic experience is that people unlearn preconceptions, bad patterns, and that they need to kind of be jostled out of the grooves that they're in. And it seems to me that awe does that as well.
Yeah, and I love the idea. One of my students coined this term: awe is destabilizing. Right? You have this experience of awe, and you're like, "Whoa!" My basic assumptions about the world can't capture that. They can't make sense of that. You know, and that's why awe is so important in visual arts, because it destabilizes ideas about gender or power or violence or what have you. And I think that's what psychedelics do in a very profound way, you know, and destabilizing way. And we're vulnerable to that.
Yeah.
A young child, 22-year-old will come back and be like, all of society is faulty and false. You know, that's trouble. You got to watch out for that. But that's destabilization, and I think it can benefit us.
So sticking with the therapeutic idea, I was really struck by the work you did with the veterans and the rafting, and that you actually have some evidence of physiological change. Can you talk a little bit about those trips?
Yeah, you know, one of the heroes of this book, and I interviewed a lot of people, like Michael said, in prisons and in orchestras and visual artists and the like, is Stacy Bear, who's one of my favorite human beings. He's 6'8". He wanted to be in the Navy, but he was too tall, so they rejected him. So he was in the Army, he was in Iraq, and a lot of veterans, came back and was suicidal, and was rock climbing. Was about to kill himself, was out rock climbing thanks to a friend, and he had an awe experience. And a lot of these transformative awe experiences, you know, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and spiritual experiences, and Darwin, whom I write about, Emerson, etc., Michael Polin, you know, Toni Morrison, all kinds of great people. They kind of shake and they vibrate, and they suddenly realize the point of life. And Stacy had this loud voice say, "Get outdoors, right? Solve your trauma of combat." He started to get veterans outdoors in the most awe-inspiring work, in part, I've ever been around, of, you know, guys with no legs who are rock climbing El Capitan, you know, rafting with blind veterans, incredible work. So he and I wanted to capture that scientifically. And so in partnership with the Sierra Club, we did one of my favorite studies, which is we got participants to raft down this part of the American River that I had actually rafted with my brother Rolf, which was another synchronicity in the book. And, you know, they're rafting, and we had veterans and high school students as part of our samples. You know, they're sometimes falling out, getting into splash fights. Totally wild study. And two really important messages of this. We gathered saliva at the start and end of the study and measured cortisol, a stress hormone. We videotaped their vocalizations and facial expressions, and there's all kinds of synchronized, like, whoop, right, which is great. And then we measured how they did a week later, and the first finding is veterans show a 32% drop in PTSD, right? You know, half a day of rafting doesn't cost a dime, no pharmaceutical intervention. They're all on pharmaceutical cocktails, 32% drop, right? That is significant. And then the second finding, and I love this about awe, is how it merges our brains and our bodies. And suddenly, like the poet Ross Gay says, the porous boundaries between ourselves and other people just start to dissolve, right? And in this study, everybody's cortisol levels were different at the start of the study. And by the end of the study, they're starting to resemble their raft mates, right? So our bodies are starting to align. And that's one of the cool things about awe is we live in this sense that we're separate and isolated, and that's partially true, but we can sync up fast, right? In the musical awe chapter, one of my favorite.
One of the things I wanted to comment on I think it's sort of maybe has come out in sort of what I've talked about before, but is worth saying sort of explicitly, but that the daily experiences of awe that he's mentioned, and we've talked a little bit about, like, the tall building, or suddenly catching a sight of Mount Rainier, without any clouds, all there standing there in its majesty, that those are really fleeting. It's seconds or fractions of a second where that awe is being operational. And if you're thinking about it in terms of awe is taking this default mode network offline. So all the busyness of your brain constructing self, working really hard all the time, and then you just take it offline for just a second. And somehow that second is emotionally healthy and good for your positive psychology. But if you could extend it to 15 seconds, then you get 15 times, and it may even be geometric that, but you're getting these orders of magnitude more bang for the buck when that experience is drawn out. But of course, that's really hard to do because the experience is a bit fleeting, and you might feel sort of shocked by the suddenness of it, but then you orient yourself and okay, you get on with life. But the rafting trip, I think what's interesting there is it's a sustained experience, and since you're having it with other people and you're having fun with other people, that's contributing to it, and so you can draw out and sustain the experience, which is also, I think, what the psychedelics are doing. That they can be powerful because you can that default mode network. If you're doing something like mushrooms or LSD, it might take it offline for an hour, right? Where you're not tracking anything. You're just experiencing the world and not noticing yourself for this long period of time. And it just seems like that's what's really operational. And I haven't encountered anyone in the stuff I've been reading or the stuff I've been watching yet who's tried to quantify that somehow. It's like, well, what is it? Like, is 5 seconds enough? Does it need to be a 15 and what is a minute? Could you do a minute or what? Anyway, it seems to me like there's a lot of interesting questions to ask about that relationship in there, but it seems important to notice that it's about how long you're taking that default mode network offline. Anyway, just want to share that.
There's a whole micro literature on rhythm. Every culture has its own rhythm to music, you might imagine. And when 9-month-olds hear their music of their culture, they all start bobbing with other adults around, and they're more altruistic to that adult as opposed to an adult bobbing to a different culture's music. So that study told us, even at the level of stress hormones, we merge with others.
So there's the pro-social impact.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I love that study. So I'm going to turn to some questions from the audience. Thank you for your questions. Somebody wants to know, this was a question I was going to ask, didn't get to. You've discussed awe as a positive experience, but is there a negative awe?
Yeah.
And I was thinking as I was reading the book, there was the fascist use of awe, right? In rallies, and people at Trump rallies feel awe.
Yeah, very much so.
So what about that?
Yeah. About a quarter of our experiences of awe, we've got a lot of data on this, are right next to horror and terror, right? Wow, I'm going to die, and it's kind of amazing I'll die, and that's horrifying, Or Stacey Bear was in combat, and there's a lot of awe and terror and horror in combat. I've worked with a lot of medical doctors during the pandemic, and a lot of their awe was right on this boundary of people getting COVID, really sick, and maybe not surviving. It's a miracle, right? It's a mystery how that unfolds. And so that's a very important part of Oz, but it is different from fear. I think historically, the etymology of awe goes back to 8th and 9th century Norse and Old English, where it was really about dread and horror. And when you read historical accounts of the social conditions of the times, people dying young, lots of plagues and famines and starvation. There's a lot of horror and awe, and we're in a different period now. But yeah, there are lots of, I worry about this, and it's already happening. I worry about the commodification of awe. I don't think we should commodify it. And it's pernicious uses, right? That and one is, you know, Dave Eggers wrote about the Trump rallies early.
Yeah.
Just getting out, and progressives and people, probably like a lot of people in this room, are like, listen to him talk. How could that ever win an election? But you go see the people, it was electric, right? And so that's interesting, is this interesting conversation about how social movements start with electric, collective, effervescent awe, and where do they take us, right? And it's up to us to figure out. There's a lot of dark awe and commodification of it.
Let's see. Through your study of awe, have you changed how you live in your life in any small, medium, or large ways?
I don't think so, actually. No, yeah. Yeah, one is everyday awe. I heard that. We defined it. And, it's just, there's so much. If you just to experience, if you just look at the clouds or listen to people's voices. And that's been really wonderful. In writing the book, it was fascinating to start with my brother's death. And, talking to Michael, and he's like, just start writing, just go. And at the start, I had no religious, spiritual training, didn't know a lot about how to approach this truth about life, and couldn't make sense of it. And through the science and the writing and narratives, I think it opened my mind to, well, life may continue, as Walt Whitman says. It goes onward and outward. I don't understand why, but I certainly experience it in these experiences of awe, of sensing my brother and being open to quantum possibilities or whatever. So that changed a lot through the writing of this, and other ways too.
There's several people who ask a variation on this question. How can awe be cultivated as a practice? Can you give us some tips?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to, we have become so task focused. We Google search to find the specific thing, and Google Maps, to go to a certain place. And, we developed, and in part with Jason, the awe walk. The awe walk is just get out and wander and wonder and give yourself a breather and look for a little mystery, go to places you don't know. So that's a good awe mindset.
Is that something you do alone, or can you do it with someone else?
You can do it with other people. You can do it in an elevator. You can do it in a Burger King line, whatever. It's available to you.
So give a little more granularity there. I'm in the Burger King line.
Okay.
That was
okay. Let's
Help
put
me out here.
So picture Michael Polin in the Burger King line. And he's like, my friend Backer thinks I can feel awe here. Man, was I hoodwinked? Yeah. So Michael, think about where the meat comes from. No, so let's pick a better example. Any kind of walk you're doing. Yeah, so take some deep breaths, focus on your walk.
Actually, it occurs to me that's not quite as absurd as it sounded when he mentioned think about where the meat comes from, because Michael Polin has this great series he did called I think on Netflix called Cooked, and one of them, she spends an hour looking at sort of how we go about preparing something. And one of them is specifically about meat. So it's this real deep dive into how humans relate to meat. And so anyway, I think he's referencing that show. So he knows that there is an intellectual content when he asks, where did the meat come from?
Right. Put aside the tendency to label things. Here's a good one. Comes out of the philosopher Edmund Burke. As you're walking, how many of you go for a regular walk? You can try this, right? plan it out, pick a place that may be a little mysterious to you, and, you know, take some deep breaths, become aware of your footsteps, which is a classic walking meditation technique. And then start to orient your attention to small things and big things. And that's a really neat perceptual exercise, which is, oh, I'll look into the reflection on my glasses and notice what is the nature of a reflection. That's small. Oh, I'm looking at all these faces and how there's synchronicity here and synchronization, right? Small to vast. And then you go to the place and take it in. That's a mindset. And then there are a lot of great techniques for feeling awe. At the Greater Good Science Center, we're building a whole library of them at ggia.berkeley.edu. Tell stories of awe. At work, when I was working with medical doctors during the pandemic, I had them last week talk about a moment of wonder and awe in your medical practice. They're watching people die from COVID, not getting to be with their families, horror show. And out of that, there'd be these little slivers of experience, right? Of, wow, that patient looked up to me and said, thank you. Tell stories of awe, awe walks, listen to music that brought you goosebumps and chills. There's a lot to do to cultivate everyday awe. And ggia.berkeley.edu has a lot of good stuff to do.
Yeah, there are wonderful practices there. Someone asked you, you addressed some of this, but where in the body does awe manifest?
Yeah, you know,
Is it in the heart? Is it in the head? Is it in the skin? Is it, you know, talk about the physiology.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the question. You know, William James, who's a hero in this book, great thinker and, you know, iconoclast and the like, really felt that all conscious life was embodied. It really begins in bodily sensations. One of my favorite quotes that I stumbled upon to frame the neurophysiology of awe in the body is Walt Whitman, who said later in his life, if the soul is not in the body, where is the soul, right? And there is this subjective life of our sense of wonder and awe in the body. And so, you know, we have wonderful science on this, and it's helpful because sometimes people come up to me and they say, you know, I'm not sure if I've ever experienced awe. And we're like, well, tell me, give me an example. Well, I was in line and Brad Pitt walked by and I gave him a big hug and we went out to dinner and he invited me to, and off you go. And I was crying and tearing up and, and I'm like, that might be awe, right? And we now have, much like the mystical experience questionnaire, a checklist, where it's like, do you tear up? How many of you have teared up just quickly at a lot of different things, right? It's kind of embarrassing, isn't it, right? That guy at the four-way stop sign, let me go first, man. Oh. People are amazing, Well, the tears are actually a very fascinating, the lacrimal gland is stimulated by the parasympathetic autonomic nervous system, which is a different branch than stress that evolved to help you socially engage. You feel warmth in your chest, which may be the vagus nerve. You may vocalize like, whoa, very deeply human universal emotion. And my favorite is the chills. And scientists have distinguished between two kinds of chills. You thought it was one, but there are two. You can get them at Burger King or wherever it is. But one is the shudder, which is about horror. And when in spiritual traditions, when you face the judgmental God, you often shudder in horror. The other is the rush of goosebumps up your arms, your neck, and your back of your head, which is really about awe and merging. And a fascinating science shows that other social mammals have this piloerection or this goosebumps, and also in this weird phenomenon called ASMR, which is about finding it in video. Do you ever take in ASMR?
I looked at a couple of them. I was inspired to by the book, but why don't you tell people what they are?
Yeah.
It's the weirdest phenomenon.
It is. Autonomous sensory meridian response. How many of you know what ASMR is?
Oh, wow.
If this was a room with 20-year-olds, they'd all be like, love it. Do you do the Korean shrimp slurping ASMR? Or or the ear cleaning ASMR. It's all about signs of intimacy, of like eating and smacking your lips, and people coming closer to like, okay, Michael, I'm going to clean your ears with this Q-tip. Are you feeling chills? Something else. I'm not close enough. I'm gonna get close to you. So, yeah,
But
it's perverse.
is that an awe experience?
It is. And this is back to your question about culture. Like, we're crazy for awe. We will do anything for awe, including ASMR. But it activates the chills. And it really is about this sense of like, I am merging with others. So is the soul in the body? We'll never know. But as a scientist, I feel like the subjective life of the soul in the tears, the warmth in your chest, the vagus nerve, the goose tingles, reduces inflammation, by the way, which is very good news for health, is a pretty interesting profile that says awe opens us up to things that are bigger than the self.
Great. Well, I think we're going to end right there. I think it's a perfect place to end. And I feel like inspired to seek awe, if not tonight, tomorrow. And I hope everyone takes something from this book, because it is, the subtitle does not oversell it. The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. So thank you for coming. Thank you, Dakar.
Okay, so first run through going on through the book. What do you think?
Does he ever in the book talk about meditation and how and whether he considers that awe? Because meditation, sometimes when you do it and then you're finished, it's not like you remember anything. You just have this sense of calmness and peace, but it's not what I would call a awe experience.
I don't recall him talking about meditation in the book, maybe beyond just a little casual mention of it. He has in other places, well, he does have a reference, page 203. He has in other places talked about it, and it's something that the institute that he works at, this Greater Good Society, that's also something they study, and so there's clearly some related things going on in terms of the positive psychology that meditation is providing compared to what awe is providing. So there's definitely related stuff in there.
I was interested in the question of can awe be cultivated? And I'm interested in the context. I have a 10-year-old granddaughter, and I'm thinking, early childhood, I mean, there is natural awe built in for many experiences, but then you find out, okay, Santa Claus is not really coming down your chimney, and this was all just, you learn more about science. You don't maybe have those casual experiences that are free roaming exploration, like he's describing, with his brother. And I'm thinking of my granddaughter too. I mean, on the one hand, like my husband is from a science background, so here he talks to her about, the solar system, but learning the names of the planets and what their characteristics are instead of looking at the sky. You do more of the science-based or thing. And then I realized also, let's say she's looking at movies on screens. And I remember when my daughter was young and we took her to Fantasia, like a early Disney thing. And, some of the music and the visuals, she was pretty awed by that. But, I know my granddaughter now, she knows enough about the technology of producing some of these. Nowadays, the effects are so commonplace. So again, I'm just thinking about those same ideas. How can you be sure with a child that they also have access to finding out what brings them into that place where they can experience awe. And I guess my thought is you can't teach it, but make sure they have exposure to various experiences that might produce that. So she's recently joined a choir, and I was excited about that, not because they will have music theory and training and so on, but because I remember singing with a group. That was really something that gave me chills, you know, and goosebumps. And if she has that experience, that might be one facet where she has that. But I think it's everyday experience can bring that about. But when you think of young people, I'm thinking, well, what are their everyday experiences, you know, and are they dulled to not feeling that in the same way? I don't know if anybody has a comment about that.
Well, I think part of it is you yourself being awed by things and sharing that. It comes to mind in Phoenix, there's this California poppy that has seeds. And at some point, if you slightly touch it, it just bursts. The seeds just burst and the pod just opens up spontaneously. And my two little nephews, I took them out. They were maybe 5 or 6. And I said, look at what happens to these seeds. And they were just, you know, of course, they kept touching all the plants and just amazed. And, you know, their mother said, which was interesting, said, oh, I'm so glad you showed them. She said, it would never occur to me to do that. So I thought that was interesting, that she was grateful I was doing it, but she recognized that she would have never done that. So I think as we are excited about whatever we're showing children, you know, I mean, I took them on their first bus ride and they were just beside themselves, you know, why is the door opening? Why is the door closing? You know, so I think as we are excited about certain things, it does get transmitted. It may not stay. But to follow up on that, I have a nagging thing in my head of your friend, your fishing friend, who finds it hard to see awe. And again, I wonder if it's in our DNA or our chemistry or our, you know, the experiences that shaped our chemistry. I mean, if we believe that awe doesn't come from outside the body, then we may have innate tendencies to recognize the amazing. And some people may not have that.
I would predict it's on a bell curve. And most of us are just sort of in the middle, and then there's some outliers who are either they can't get it or they get it all the time, and the rest of us are trying to find it.
I would like to suggest that maybe we're asking the question the other way around. Because awe is something that is out of our control. That's why it's bigger than us. So maybe we can ask what closes us down to awe. If we assume that there's tons of things that are bigger than we are. So our attention to that is always there. But what can we do to close ourselves down to awe? And I would gather that it's a quality of attention, of being too hurried, of being not thankful enough, not open enough. When I ask a lot of people and I say how you're doing, they say, busy, busy, busy. And I say, I am so sorry, because that closes you down to everything. And then they say, I just said busy, busy, busy. And I said, yeah, I said, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think attention is connected.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think with the granddaughter, you can try to put her in places where she might experience it, where you might experience it, and then there is the how do you just try to not be busy, so slow, find slow times, Yeah. I mean, it definitely does seem like, in terms of trying to cultivate it, that nature is just sort of the most fruitful, most productive well to tap into, because we respond so predictably to things in nature, especially things that are big in nature. But I like the idea too of, yeah, that you need to, if your husband's teaching her about the science of the astrophysics, to also show her the photos of the astrophysics. Because that's we're such visual creatures too, to see that there might be its own kind of awe in there. And it occurs to me maybe that I have an experience of that. So as a high school student, young high school student, stumbled into taking a class in physics. And I just remember being, and maybe awestruck is the right word, at how these simple formulas about motion and time and velocity, that with all of that and a little manipulation, that you can predict all kinds of things in the world because of how they're moving, and just these little simple formulas. And so that was a way to tap into it. But I think too, when the teacher is good at, and it probably helped me, was the teacher having examples that he could show us, and even if it was just marbles moving, but to show that you can take this math and then predict what these marbles are going to do. And it's just, wow. So I think science, if you hit the kid at the right, time period, they can be awestruck with the science just by itself too. But definitely visuals help.
They were talking about PTSD, and I'm a psychologist. I think of that as some component is kind of short-circuited so that it's stuck in the past. And the memory hasn't passed through the part of the brain that puts a timestamp on it. And there's a process called memory reconsolidation, where you can revisit. When we revisit memories, they don't necessarily go back in the same area of the brain, and you can remove the emotional component that's attached to it. And there are a whole bunch of different therapies that work with that, but they're body-based. They're body-based. And I thought it was a really good question that Michael Polin asked of where is awe, where is trauma stored? Trauma is partly stored in the body. In fact, sometimes when you do, it's called memory reconsolidation, where you do that detachment and put a timestamp on things. Sometimes people don't remember it anymore because so much of the memory was actually in the body. But it can happen instantaneously. It can take time, but sometimes it can happen instantaneously, that they still remember the thing. It's still a terrible thing, but it feels like it was a long time ago.
That's and when I have an interest in the psychedelics, so I've been reading a little bit and listening to some podcasts about that stuff, and it definitely seems like that's exactly the mechanism they're describing. Is that if you take people, they're treating someone with PTSD using like mushrooms or something, that's what the mushrooms allow them to put the timestamp on it, and therefore allow them to let it go somehow.
I'm not against people using those things, but when I was on my internship in a mental hospital, I saw people who wound up there from taking psychedelics and were maybe permanently damaged by that. So I think doing it with reputable people, the setting and the preparation and the accompaniment that you get and the after treatment that you get is all really important to having a good experience with that. And it may be that some people are just kind of predisposed to be damaged or become psychotic in that way, but you don't always know who that is.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, power. It's powerful chemicals, and it could work good or work bad depending on the situation. That's true. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Let's see. I have let's see, what are we doing on time? Oh, I just have 5 minutes. Oh, here I have a short little one. That has a little bit more science dropped in. Oh, what am I doing? Let's go back to try sharing. No, oh, what did I do? Move that over there.
From the beginning, we've dreamed of creating a better future. Now, we're setting out to be carbon neutral by 2050. And we're going to keep dreaming, no matter where we go.
There we are. Found
I
you.
started Brain HQ because I was frustrated. In 40 years as a neuroscientist, I'd witnessed.
Oh, nuts. No, sorry, wrong video. That's my note. I was looking at a note here. I missed the 1 in the 31. I thought that was 3. Oh. No, I found this video of him talking about the vagus nerve. But I'm thinking I want to have a little more time to be able to do that, and we're getting too close to the end. Yeah, I think we'll just have to let you go a minute or two early.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody has last thoughts? All right, well, go out and find some
I
awe.
do.
Oh.
You can't see me. I don't know what I do wrong, right? You can't see me.
Nope, can't see you.
No.
I'm just thinking that it must be very much linked to experience.
Uh-huh.
To see all, because I think it's very difficult if you have had terrible experiences like now what's going on in the world in the wars, to see all when you grow up as a child where people endanger your life. You see killings, graves, bodies, and how can you get away from that when you even grow older? That's always going to be with you. So isn't that a handicap to ever seeing awe, because it's awful instead of awe?
Oh, well, and yeah, and he was even talking about how after his brother died that he just suddenly couldn't experience awe anymore.
No,
so,
but that
it happened
is
to a child. Yeah.
And and I was thinking about an experience I once had when I went to the Jewish meditation, and we were guided into our meditation, and we were guided into a dance. And here this woman was dancing her heart out, and she was having a wonderful, and of course I knew she was from Israel, and she was connected to the Holocaust. And I said to her, I'm really surprised that you can dance like this, but when you have such a history behind you. And she looked at me and she said, we're alive. But I cannot let that go out of my head somehow, that this happened. And also the atomic bomb, that was a horrible thing, and we're still in awe of that. So we're in awe of ugly things as well, aren't we?
Oh yeah, it can be, yeah.
So
right.
That made me thinking.
And yeah, it does seem like too, if that trauma is early enough in a child's life, it may be really hard to undo it.
Yeah. And we're creating it all. We're sowing it all over the world. Sorry, I'm a little depressed about it.
Yeah, but at least there is this flip side where we can try to undo some of it. So
yes, I'll cuddle the cat.
Okay, yeah, there you go.
Well, thank you.
All right, everybody, have a good week. See you next Thursday.
You too.
Okay, let me stop a recording.